So hi, ladies. Thank you all for joining me today on this Saturday. I really appreciate you. Y'all are great friends of mine, but you also are esteemed colleagues. And so I do appreciate your time and you coming together for Child Abuse Prevention Month. I know that we are experiencing a crazy pandemic right now that's shifting all of our worlds. But I didn't want the importance of Child Prevention Abuse Month to be lost, because as we also know, there is increasing numbers, that's out there that child abuse is happening at a higher number now during this pandemic. And so I thought it was even more important for us to just really come together and shed some insight to our work with child sexual abuse victims and families. And, to give insight also just to the public. Part of why I was inspired to do this is, as we're talking about the pandemic, I know that a lot of the news will have the first line medical workers, and they're giving us insight of how this corona looks in the inside of the hospitals. And so, based on what side you are on things, it completely provide you a different insight. And so it made me think about us being able to provide insight on what it's like to sit before individuals and family on the healing side of child sexual abuse. And so again, thank you for joining. I would first like to start by having you all introduce yourselves and give a little bit of history of your work in child sexual abuse, whether it's something that you still are doing or something, that's of your past. But if you could start off by doing that, and I will follow suit after you all, then that'll be great. So whoever wants to.
You got a preference, or?
Well, Diane, since you spoke up, go ahead.
Since I opened my mouth. Okay, my name is Diane Vines, and I have worked with all of you. It's awesome. You guys are amazing. I have been a therapist, trained in marriage and family therapy, graduated in 1999, started my internship working at a child advocacy center where we did sexual abuse treatment for the victims and their families, non-offending family members, in 98, and I just refused to leave until they told me it was a good idea to leave. And so, but that was, 17 years later. So, but in the interim, I started working with Dr. Bruce Perry and the Child Trauma Academy and the Neurosequential Network. I've always been interested in systemic work, which is why I chose marriage and family therapy to begin with. And then once I learned about the brain and how trauma and attachment impacts how the brain organizes and develops and functions, I got really interested in that and learned that through Dr. Perry. So now I'm the director of NMT there. And I mentor groups, study groups, answer clinical questions, that sort of thing, have a small private practice. I can still continue to see sexually abused kids and adults who were abused as children. But a lot of abuse, most of my work is done with people, adults and children who've had abuse in their history. And I also work with the Archdiocese of Galveston, Houston, and I'm the victim advocate coordinator there. So people who have been abused by priests or clergy as children, I intervene there, collect their story, their account of what happened, and participate on the review board. That's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Yes, of course. Heather?
Sure. I'm heather.timmis. I'm also a licensed marriage and family therapist, supervisor, and I graduated from University of Houston Clear Lake in 2012 and have been doing this ever since. I started off at the Children's Assessment Center working with sexual abuse pretty exclusively. Since then, I've moved on to Nick Finnegan Counseling Center and the Couple Zone, where I do kind of a mixture of different types of therapies and different populations, but I still have a lot of people that have been, you know, abused, whether sexually, physically, emotionally. And so that's definitely a population close to my heart, and I continue to work with today.
Pam.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. Glad to see all of you guys. I am now a licensed clinical professional counselor since I moved from Texas to Maine. They added a letter for me. So I did that about 1.5 years ago, and I've been licensed in Texas for over 20 years. Worked a little bit in private practice. My favorite job, though, was working at the Children's Assessment Center, which is an advocacy center treating sexual abuse and working with children, families, adults who've been sexually abused. And now I work at the New England Counseling Center, and I'm learning that I'm in a different state. There seems to be a lack of providers, really, at the advocacy center. So I am getting a lot of calls of people who have reported it, no interview, no one's called them back, and it's been a while. So I'm starting to see people. So I'm excited about that.
Well, we miss you here in Texas, but they gained an accent.
Oh, thank you. I miss Texas. One thing that I've added to all that is the EMDR, and I really enjoy using EMDR to treat child victims, especially the adults going back to that childhood trauma. It really provides a structure and introduces the coping skills needed. It, you know, uses the brain's natural ability to heal. So I'm using a lot of that too.
Thank you. Sadia.
Sure. Hi, I'm Sadia Attorney, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist supervisor as well. I've been practicing since 2009. So I started off at the Children's Assessment Center under the supervision of Diane. And after my internship, I was hired on at the Brazoria County Alliance for Children, which is the advocacy center in Brazoria County, which is a little bit outside of Houston. And that was, they had just received their first grant to have in-house mental health services provided to the victims of sexual abuse and their families. So I stayed there from 2009 to 2015, 16-ish, I can't remember the exact year, providing the therapy and hiring extra therapists, starting the program, mentoring the interns there. So that was primarily what I did while still doing a little couple work on the side in private practice. And then around 2015, 2016, I left the advocacy center and went full-time into private practice. And now I'm the co-owner of the Friendswood Center for Couples and Families, where I do still see people that are experiencing trauma, but I've transitioned from working with kids to mainly working with either older teens or adults. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you for being a part. And Veronica.
Hey, so my name is Veronica Villarreal. I'm also a licensed marriage and family therapist, as well as a registered play therapist. Like Pam and many of you, I also do some EMDR with clients. I really enjoy that modality as well. Let's see, so I started in 2009 practicing, and I started at Catholic Charities, where I worked with undocumented minors who were living in a residential shelter, and saw a lot of trauma there. That's where I was like, just my eyes were open there. I was under the supervision of Diane as well during that time. So I realized I loved trauma work, and but at the shelter, it was very short term. They were fortunately there for a short amount of time. So I wanted to do some more long-term work and healing with clients. So I moved on to the Children's Assessment Center and was there for for several years, working with sexual abuse survivors, the itty bitty ones, adolescents, and caregivers. After that, I went on part-time to the Trauma and Grief Clinic at Texas Children's Hospital, where I still am part-time, and I see, again, little ones there. I do some play therapy. We do some different modalities as well, and work with the adolescents. I also have very small private practice as well, where I continue to work with children and adult survivors of sexual abuse, as well as clients with, other challenges that they're experiencing. And I also do a little bit of work with the Archdiocese of Houston-Galveston as well, where I am the Assistant Victims Advocate Coordinator, along with Diane there, and part of the room.
And I am Shameitragreen, and I have, I'm also a licensed marriage and family therapist. I graduated from University of Houston Clear Lake 2009. Prior to that, I did my internship, which is where I had my first exposure of working with families that were dealing with sexual abuse at Children's Assessment Center, and that was under the supervision of Diane. And Diane continued to supervise me up until my full license. So I was there, and then at the time I was also working in at-risk schools in a program called Communities in Schools, where we were providing all types of mental health resources for the students there. I worked in a junior high, and I also worked in a high school, and also just, any type of services, any type of mental health crisis that would come up with family members. When I graduated, I continued to work in that capacity as a therapist, and then moved on to working at a residential center that dealt with trauma, borderline personality disorders, and addiction, and was there for a bit. Started an aftercare program for the young ladies that were there, because it was working with young ladies from 18 to 25, but they lived all over the country. And so when they would transition back into their lives, I started up an after program, which kind of integrated telehealth then. That was really my first experience of working with individuals with telehealth, and here we are now. And then in 2012, I was invited to come back to CAC as a contract therapist, and so was there for 5 years. At the same time, I had started up my private practice part-time, and so all areas I was constantly still working with trauma and working with sexual abuse. And then along the way, I've kind of continued to have contracts. As of currently, I have a contract where I do EMDR with individuals that are dealing with addiction, dealing with abuse. I also do EMDR in my private practice. And then I also work with a program in Harris County called Nurturing Parenting, where I am working with caregivers that also have had trauma, and oftentimes a lot of abuse, sexual abuse, and helping them to heal so they can, be able to manifest healthier habits, connections with their children. And so, it's still a passion of mine to work with survivors. And I typically tend to, even when I was back in the CDC days, work on the older end of things. I have worked with the littles, but, I realized that my passion is more in the older part of the population. So adolescents and caregivers. And oftentimes I have a lot of caregivers that are coming to me and disclosing for the first time. So doing a lot of that, child work with them to be able to go and heal from past abuse. So, okay. So thank you all for all of that great experience, and, letting everybody know, and definitely helping the community understand that you are definitely a resource. So I would like to start by really asking you all to share with one another, what is your biggest, it could be one or two, but what is one of your biggest takeaways or awareness that you've had in working in child sexual abuse or abuse and working with victims and their families?
You know, you mentioned one. You said that when you're working with adult survivors, very often this is the first time they've disclosed, and it's surprising how often people keep this to themselves. They don't talk about it. They think they're the only ones, and they're not. Because, you know, it's anywhere from, you know, I don't even know what the stats are anymore, but, you know, 25%. When I was working at the advocacy center, it was, you know, roughly 25% of females and 15 to 18% of males were sexually abused before they were 18 years old. It's a pretty hefty population. A lot of times people think, oh, I've dealt with it, but they haven't. That's why they're having trouble functioning. That's why they wind up with children who get sexually abused. That's why they wind up sitting in your office. They haven't dealt with it. They've tried to ignore it. It doesn't go away. You really do have to process it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and piggybacking off of that is the thing that surprised me the most is how many different experiences people go through and how differently that manifests in everybody. Like, you know, some people don't see what's happening to their children because they also went through sexual abuse and they think, I didn't react that way. I didn't do that. I can't believe they're doing that. That must mean it didn't happen, you know, those types of things. And so just seeing how different people handle it, and, you know, they go in such different directions to try to keep themselves safe or to try to, you know, find meaning in life. And so it's just so different. And so many people have that stereotype of everyone's going to react exactly the same way. And it's not true at all.
Mm-hmm.
Great
Yeah,
point.
I think to piggyback off of Heather, it has been very interesting to see how different people cope and how they try to create safety in their lives based on the abuse they experience, and how they're very their sense of safety is also the thing that causes a lot of the issues in their relationships later on in life. So like when I'm working with couples, seeing how someone may keep themselves safe by not being vulnerable in various ways is also the thing that's causing the most disconnection in their marital relationship. And it's also been interesting to see the scripts that people have about what their abuse has meant to them, and how that becomes kind of like the soundtrack of their lives, of, you know, things like everybody's here just to take advantage of me, or I can't trust the world, or I'm not safe anywhere. Just these really big messages that permeate all aspects of their lives and play over and over and over again.
I think one of the most surprising things I learned is the complicated relationship with the perpetrator, especially when the victim's still a child. So many times you hear a parent say, well, how could cousin Johnny be the perpetrator? She loves being around him. And people don't know how complicated that relationship is. Children naturally want to please and want to be loved and want attention. And even if it's not the appropriate kind of attention, it's still attention. So I guess it's that the abuse may not look how people think it would look. And that's part of the shame and part of the guilt that kind of, if that child doesn't tell and grows up into be an adult, that shame and guilt of why didn't I tell? I must have been a party to it. So that complicated relationship.
When you mention, you know, people, it doesn't look how you think it's going to look. A lot of time, the thought just escaped me. Oh my God, I hate that. Go on. Back.
Come back.
I was too busy listening.
It's okay. No, but you know, piggybacking on Pam, definitely helping people to understand how people love their abusers, because again, going with the stats, over 90% of people are abused not by strangers, but they're abused by individuals that they know and love. And part of the big thing, the understanding about abuse is abuse cannot happen without trust. So these individuals, you know, they love the person, and they don't always have bad times. You know, it's not that the person is 100% bad or 100% good. So I think a lot of times with kids, it's, you know, I want the healthy part of the relationship. You know, I want the connection, I want the fun, I want the laughter, but it's about the other part of it that makes me feel uncomfortable, the, you know, the touches, the looks, the, you know, that's the part I don't. And so I think kids try to negotiate, you know, how can I keep the parts of the relationship that, you know, feel good and feel safe, and get rid of the parts that don't, you know, and sometimes having to deal with, but if I share and tell someone about the parts that I don't, then I am having to surrender the good parts with this individual. And that's just really hard for a child to navigate and to hold.
And I think sometimes that becomes part of the trauma. You know, that's the additional part. It's not just what happened, it's what the fallout when people do find out what happens, having to go in and have a forensic interview, not being able to go to grandpa's house anymore, seeing like the fighting between mom and dad, or, you know, just all of the relationships, how it changes in the family. And for a child, that sometimes is equally, if not more traumatizing than what they had already endured. And it further that message, further like confirms that message of this is all my fault. If I had just kept my mouth shut, then none of this would have happened.
Mm-hmm. So many kids, that's where a lot of like guilt.
Part of that fallout.
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Heather.
I was just going to say that's where so much of the guilt and shame comes from, is feeling like because they told, this person's in trouble, and so it's their fault. But they would have had nothing to tell if nothing had happened. So it's still not their fault, even if they're the ones that brought it to, you know, the authorities' attention. And the other surprising thing is how many people in their family don't believe and don't listen to them. And that also adds to that guilt and shame, feeling like they did something wrong.
Mm-hmm. It adds to also them feeling alone and abandoned sometimes by the family members, and that stuff that you also have to like work through as well. But I agree with what Sadia was saying, and what all of you are saying, is everything, not just the abuse itself, but just everything becomes part of their narrative. And that's all traumatizing to them. And that's all stuff that they have to like process and heal from when they've been sexually abused.
Mm-hmm. And they get real sensitive to how other people perceive them. And part of that, you know, there are a lot of moms that, you know, it's like, that couldn't have happened because I didn't see it. And I can't even tell you how many moms I've had to explain, you're not supposed to see it. If you saw it, you would stop it. The perpetrator didn't want you to stop it. You're not supposed to see it. It's supposed to be behind your back, maybe even behind your back in front of your face, but you're not supposed to see it. So, you know, and very often, the other thing is there's so many bad guys in this thing that based on other people's perception, you know, that it's their fault, that sometimes, because I remember the Penn State situation with Jerry Sandusky and Joe Paterno, and the way that came out in the media, everybody was talking about Joe Paterno. I was like, wait, what did Joe do? It was Sandusky. How did he wind up, you know, in the corner, letting Joe have all the blame? But we do that. And it was Sandusky that did it all. And I'm sure you'll cover grooming at some point. Oh my God, he was masterful. He was masterful.
They're all pretty masterful.
Mm-hmm.
I think in a lot of ways, like pop culture, with all of the whatever you believe or how you feel about it, with all of the celebrities that have come out with or like documentaries done on like R. Kelly and Michael Jackson, regardless of what you believe, it really shows how grooming works. Because for all of us, I think it's like, well, that's my childhood, or so I can't even tolerate thinking that this person could be capable of that. So I'm just going to put it in the category of falsehood, right? So imagine that being your own father or your grandfather or your uncle or whatever it is. It's that, I guess the word would be cognitive dissonance. I can't even wrap my head around how someone that I see in this way, which is all good, that's brought me so much joy, can also do this thing. So for a lot of people, they just turned a blind eye to it, and it helps regulate ourselves to not have to think about it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I know that in speaking of working with caregivers and working with adult survivors, when I was during my internship and kind of when I went back, I don't know why, but I kind of became the person that worked with oftentimes non-believing parents. And I remember receiving great advice from Diane that, you know, it's a parent's often, you know, for the majority, it's a parent's natural ability to want to, if they hear that somebody is hurting their child, you know, to become mama bear, you know. And so for there to be a parent that is sitting before you that where it's almost easier for them to believe that it didn't happen than it did, then, you know, follow that pain. There's pain there that is speaking so loud to that person not being able to sit in the reality of their child. And so that always stayed with me. And I would have, you know, and I would have people ask, you know, whether it was other colleagues that don't work in this area, or it was just people in my life, how can you sit before a mom, let's say, that, you know, she doesn't believe, and this woman was kind of this big monster. And then me having to explain that part of the therapeutic process is to give a different experience than what this person experienced since outside of this. So kind of in layman's, you know, world, people will see, how could you not believe your child? You're this horrible person. And if I took that same attitude and that same energy in this space that's supposed to be not judgment and healing and, you know, being able to deal with those feelings of guilt or whatever else, if I made this be about what this person gets on the outside, it wouldn't be beneficial to that child that is needing this parent to show up for them. And so I have to remain curious to what is this person's pain. And what I realize is how prevalent that child sexual abuse is generational. And a lot of times that pain was this parent now being a secondary victim, their wounds being awakened by the disclosure of their child. And now they're having to sit not only with their child's abuse, but now they're having to go back and revisit a pain maybe that was never explored because it wasn't safe for them to explore. You know, maybe they didn't have the same support that now that their child is having. And so all of these layers of things are coming up for them, and it's making it hard for them to be able to be who they need to be. So I just think that's really important, just staying curious, because, you know, as human beings, we will do it. We're biologically wired to do whatever we need to do to not feel pain. And sometimes that shows up in, you know, not the prettiest ways, not the most tender ways. And so we just have to remain curious to people's pain. So.
And on top of that, if, you know, that person admits that their spouse or their family member hurt their child, that reflects on their own meaning and value about themselves, because I chose this person and I brought them into our lives. So what does that say about me? And that's a really hard thing also to wrap your head around. And so it's easier to just avoid and not have to go there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And they may be financially dependent on that person that's being accused, the perpetrator. Yeah.
And I know for me, I've always told caregivers and told, you know, supporters and parents that not only was the child groomed and manipulated, but you were too, you know, because again, a perpetrator's job is to not get caught. And so whatever they need to say, whoever they need to be for that, then everybody that is falls in line to that. And so helping them to be able to understand that as well, that they were also groomed, that they were also manipulated.
Does someone go more in depth on what grooming is for people that don't really know? Because obviously we all work with that all the time, but there might be some people that don't understand that term.
Oh. You want me to do it? I'll do it. You know, grooming, I remember working with a mom that said, my son is clean. And said, that's not what I meant. You know, grooming is presenting yourself in such a way that, first of all, it's doing things, say, with or to the child to make sure that the child doesn't tell. That's one thing. So if it's getting them treats or treating them extra special, whatever it is you need to do to get them to cooperate, and not tell, that's grooming the child. Grooming other people is getting them to see a side of you that may not even exist, but you're creating it so that you don't fall under suspicion. Because if somebody walks in a room, you know, and catches you doing something unsavory with a child, it's not what it looks like, and they might believe that. Or so they don't want to get caught. They want you to believe. They've set up a whole persona so that if you do get caught, people say, oh, I can't believe they would do that. Do you know that they are all these things, that this extra, you know, secret life this person is? They set up a whole other life. So they groom the neighbors, they groom the other family members, they groom their partner, they groom their boss, they groom everyone, so that if it comes out, people will go, nope, couldn't happen, no way, because they are this persona they presented. And so, and then the child is not believed. And that's the point of it. Grooming is to set it up so you don't get caught. And if you do get caught, no one believes the child and they believe you.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So you also have access, right? Like it's that process of gaining that trust. So you have access to that child. Sure, you can go take my kid to the movies by yourself. You're like, you're being such a good mentor. Like it's all about that development of trust. So you don't even begin to question or think that there'd be any ulterior motives to why they have such an interest in your kid, or any impure thoughts about your kid or anything like that.
Exactly. Churches are a perfect place for that. Because, you know, you can have the youth minister or the pastor or anybody in a position of leadership. And in a church, you think, oh, everybody has the same values I do, so surely this wouldn't happen in a church. Well, guess what? That makes you, I hate to say it, but you're a perfect sucker. Because you are relaxed. Your antenna's not up. You're not paying, you trust everybody there. So, and they know that. So they take full advantage of that.
Mm-hmm.
They're master manipulators, and they seek those opportunities where people will trust them and they will have access to these kiddos. So yes, the church, you know, so it's not that there's that whole debate, like, does the church create, right, these monsters, or is it really, no, that's who they were, right? And they sought out the place where they're able to be trusted and be able to have access. Coaches, teachers, you know, oftentimes parents is like, yeah, we want those private lessons. You see something special in my child, right? Or the tutoring or whatever, you know, but it allows access to kids as well.
Yes.
And a little bit more on grooming. I think like one of the ways I like to view it also, it's kind of like those, breaking those boundaries, right? Like, and you touched on that, Diane, where it's like those physical boundaries or emotional boundaries or behavioral boundaries. So it's getting them also, so they may not have perpetrated yet, but it's getting them to a place where they trust them and they are comfortable with them to, you know, comfortable, right? So like those physical boundaries, it could be like the wrestling, right? Somebody walks in and they may not think anything of it, right? But during that wrestling, like little play, they could rub, right? Like their private area, right? And it leaves the child confused because, well, we're playing, we're wrestling. Surely so-and-so didn't mean to touch my breasts or my, you know? And then, so it's breaking those boundaries, getting kids comfortable to their hands being on them. So it's, you know, they may leave their hand a little bit longer, you know, on their shoulder or their hand, or like wrestling or things like that. Treating them special, sharing personal information, right? Like only you understand me. I feel like I often see that a little bit more with the teenagers, like the emotional boundaries, right? Like you get me, you know, and you know, that's where you often see them romanticizing, right? Like this relationship too. So it's definitely getting them, prepping them for the actual abuse.
Yeah. And I think that's what also makes it so hard. And I don't know if this is going into another one of your questions, Shameitra, but what makes it so hard for kids, because almost every kid that I ever worked with, they knew something didn't feel right, right? Like they didn't have the language for it, and they weren't told, because, well, this person's not touching my private parts yet, right? And that's how we talk to kids. If anybody touches here and there or there, then that's wrong. But what about when someone just puts their hand on your shoulder and you just get this weird feeling inside? Like, okay, well, no, what do I do with that? So you just kind of let it go longer, and they don't know that it's wrong, right? And so then it gets to that part where now I am being touched on one of my private parts, but this has been happening for so long now. Now what do I do? Or now I really like this person and we have this relationship, and I don't want to give that up because I like going for ice cream on Saturdays and I have to do this part to get this part. So now I'm like in this. So I think it's just really confusing for kids that don't know. It's not just touching on the private parts. It's if anybody does anything to you that makes you feel uncomfortable, that gives you weird feelings in your stomach, that makes you think, I don't really know if I like that, then that becomes something that you speak on as well, or tell an adult.
You know what's a good piggyback off that is we need to teach our kids, and we need to give them permission to say no to any touch from anyone at any time. You know, this whole, oh, hug Uncle, Jimmy. Well, I don't want to hug Uncle Jimmy, but, I've been told I have to. It's not nice to not, that's mean. So the message that the child gets is it doesn't matter how it feels to you, whether or not you want someone touching you. If an adult says they want to do it, you have to go along with it, and it's mean if you don't. So when you don't have permission over what happens to your own body and who gets to touch it, it just opens the door to someone else doing it and saying, well, your mom said I could, your mom said I could, or, anything along those lines. So it's important that your kids know that, I used to work with this woman at the Advocacy Center when I was an intern, and she was Paula McKeon. She was a psychologist, and she was a go-getter and a trendsetter. And she told her, she had 3 boys. She told her boys, if there's ever time you don't want me to touch you, just say it and I'll stop. That includes hugs. So one of her boys said, no more hugs. Her heart was broken. But, so I thought that was brilliant. So I told my daughter the same thing. She was, it's like, if anybody touches you, you have a right to tell them no and stop. And so that includes me. Yes. So we'd be wrestling and tickling, like you would say, and then when she'd have enough, she'd say, stop, Mom. And if I touched her at all, she said, Mom, you said that if I didn't want that. Yes, you're right. You're right. So that, that includes all of us. You need to be able to say, I don't want you touching me.
Yeah. And I think sometimes it goes beyond just the physical boundaries too, because we constantly force kids to do things they don't want to do. And obviously there's limits, like you have to do that in some cases, but you have to share this toy. You have to go spend time at this person's house. You have to do this. And that's just, they don't have the ability to really learn those boundaries and how to say no and protect themselves through all of those different circumstances too. So it's not just the physical body, it's also all those other circumstances.
And people don't respect children. I'm sorry, because this came to mind. A long time ago, used to work for L'Oreal. I was at a Walmart and I was working on the display, and this woman came up with this little boy who had the most perfect, beautiful red hair. It was perfect. He was about 5. And I said to her from a distance, a safe distance, a COVID distance of about 6 to 8 feet, your son has the most beautiful hair. And he ran and hid behind her. And she said, people run their hands through his hair. And I thought, oh my God, he's doing that. If he was 25 instead of 5, you wouldn't walk up and run your hands through his hair and go to a strange man and go, you have the most gorgeous hair, but we'll do it to kids all day long. Well, what message does that send them?
Yeah.
Right.
And I think language that I want to add to what y'all are describing perfectly is autonomy. We're talking about body autonomy, helping children to understand that your body belongs to you, and you have the right to be able to make decisions on when, you know, even if it's good touch, because oftentimes we'll, you know, in this field talk about good touch and bad touch, but even if it's good touch, you know, and mommy wants to hug you and you're just not in a huggable mood right now, it is okay. And also helping adults understand that the thing that you're trying to protect is a consistent message for a child to understand their emotional and physical autonomy, not in protecting a adult's feelings against being rejected by a child. You know, because a lot of times it's, well, we don't want grandma to be sad, or we don't want, you know, for your aunt to be, you know, feel bad that, you know, and so helping adults to understand that I'll hurt an adult's feeling anytime over having my child, you know, feel like they're not safe in their space, or that they don't have the control over their emotions and their physical state. And, you know, and that's not always the easiest thing, because that's also kind of coming in and changing up some family traditions and values. And so, you know, you're having to tell your family members, oh, well, you know, doesn't seem like he wants to hug right now, but we can do maybe a high five, we can do a fist bump, you know, let's check in. And so a lot of times I think, you know, part of what happens is caregivers are in the middle of, I don't want to be offensive and go against, because that's what I did, but at the same time having this new sense of awareness that, you know, we just have to create consistent messages with kids across the board. So, so I know that people probably have heard body autonomy, and also Sadia had mentioned about, you know, actions and things that kids are being exposed to that necessarily you wouldn't say is sexual abuse, but that goes into the realm of exploitation, you know, and so exploitation is a way that leads into physical and sexual abuse. So I just wanted to throw those words out there, as I know that people have heard those before, and kind of connect what it was that y'all were saying. So thank you. But this also, y'all already segued into the next question that I wanted to ask you guys. What advice, and of course y'all have already touched on it, but what advice would you give professionals, would you give caregivers, in things that they can do to create safety, and create these conversations of child abuse prevention?
Well, I don't know. Go ahead, Pam, but because I go first all the time. Go.
Okay. So to answer that question, I want to go back to something Sadia had said, and she said it, trusting their guts, right?
Yes.
Kids need to trust their guts, but you know what? The caregivers need to also, because the groomers they understand that we want to be polite to each other. We don't want to hurt other people's feelings. And they'll also normalize those boundaries that they're breaking. So, oh, that's so-and-so, he wrestles with everybody. Well, that perpetrator does that on purpose. He doesn't abuse all those kids. He just wants people to get used to them wrestling. So ask questions if something doesn't seem right. If it doesn't seem right to spend the night at Coach Johnny's house, probably isn't. So trust your gut and ask questions, and don't be afraid to ask other parents how they feel about it.
I'll piggyback off of you, Pam, because that's what popped into my mind as well. Because Sadia had mentioned that, yes, I've never worked with I think most kids, they something didn't feel right, but like you said, they didn't have the words for it. But the parents as well, the caregivers, I mean, the majority of them, they can go back in retrospect and be like, something didn't feel right, but they, it was a family member, somebody they knew, they didn't want to hurt the feelings, or all the perpetrator's actions were showing otherwise, right? So it was going against what my instinct was telling me. So I would just think of it logically and just kind of no, that it can't be. But, and I think that's one of the, of course, the guilt and shame and everything that goes there with the caregiver, but also kind of empowering them and helping them learn to trust their gut again is a part of the work that we do as well, because they are this is going to happen again. I'm not going to be able to pick up on the signs. And we have to remind you, no, you had that instinct, right? You allowed your brain, right? The logical part and everything else that the perpetrator was doing to tell you otherwise. So yeah, and I think another thing that I would add for caregivers is, because I think this was something that was surprising to me as well, is how little understanding they had some times of sexual development, just and sexuality and how, and depending on some of them because of their own sexual abuse history, but some of them even if they didn't have a history, you know, it was something that wasn't talked about in their families for various reasons, right? But just they had very little understanding, right? So like we have this experience where someone now has taught your child about sexuality in a very inappropriate way, right? And we're trying to correct that, right? And so you don't want them in therapy forever. So it's working with the caregiver to helping them become comfortable, right? And knowledgeable. Oftentimes they don't want to because they don't want to bring it up because, oh, it might make them sad or it might make them uncomfortable. And it's not that they necessarily have to bring up the child's sexual abuse, but just learning to incorporate like conversations into their lives, right? Whenever it comes up, whenever there's opportunities, just teaching them appropriate names to body parts, right? The good touch, the bad touch. And it's not a one-time conversation. These are conversations that will happen throughout whenever there's a good opportunity, you know, if something's on TV or the child comes home and mentions something that somebody said at school. So just really capitalizing on those. But I find that often caregivers are uncomfortable with answering those questions and they have to work to kind of get past that, you know? And if they don't know the answer, it's as simple as, you know, I don't know, but let's research it. And researching and being open and honest and truthful with children about sexual development and sexuality, because that's really important in protecting them as well.
And I think it's good, Veronica, that you brought up about it being an ongoing conversation, because I think it's also an important point to make note of that. Let's say if a child was abused at the age of 5 and, you know, and they have the resources, they go to therapy and they do the work that they can at that age. And then now they are, you know, now preteen and they're 10 and 11, or, you know, their body is changing. They're more aware of the world, you know, and so now there's different questions around sexuality. Now there's different questions around, you know, emotional boundaries. And so sometimes that earlier trauma will start to manifest and come up again in different ways at the age that they are now, just because they're more aware of it. And so now they're having to go back and almost do some work and do some healing on the trauma that they had based off of where they are now and the knowledge that they have now. And so the ongoing conversations, I think, helps with that, because, you know, it isn't a one-time thing or, oh, we addressed that then. And so I'm kind, you know, and I've had parents say that. So I'm kind of confused about why this is coming up now and it hasn't, and just understanding that with trauma will manifest at different milestones and different, you know, stages of life, because there's different things that's just awakening us at these different developmental milestones. And so, you know, being aware that that's normal and it's okay to go back in and do the work in what you need where you are now.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And I know one thing I want to add is, parents, please listen with your eyes and get to know your kids. And you know, that sounds like a ridiculous thing to say, but the more time you spend with your children and the more time you spend listening instead of talking at and talking to, talk with. You'd be surprised how often parents can shut a child down when that's the other thing I wanted to say, is that very often a child may try to tell when they've had just about as much as they can take, but it's not going to come out as Uncle Johnny's touching my private parts. It's going to be veiled language where they kind of test the water to see literally what does it feel like for me as this victimized child to say this out loud? Can I tolerate what that feels like? And then when it travels across the airwaves and it hits my mother's ears, what is she thinking? Am I still safe? Does she believe me? Am I going to get in trouble? Yeah. So all that feedback, and then what does her feedback feel like? Blah, blah. So it's, you know, so-and-so touched my cookie. Well, tell them not to eat your cookies. It's, you know, it's dinner.
Go wash your hands for dinner. Yeah. Like
right. Yeah. The other thing, here's one. I don't like spending time with Uncle Johnny anymore. Oh, you shouldn't say that. He's not, eliminate, you shouldn't say that. You shouldn't think that. You shouldn't feel that. Just don't even say those things. Ask why. How come? And it doesn't have to be why? It's just well, how come you don't want to? You make it safe. You create an environment where your kids can come to you and tell you anything. I know when my kid was growing up, all I wanted was for her to be able to tell me anything. So almost nothing was off limits. There's no way to say it that was off limits. Now, if you're worried that they're going to go to school and say all kinds of stuff you don't want the teacher calling you about, because they'll do it, you have a conversation about, well, I'm glad we talked about this. If you go to school and tell your, friends, what do you think will happen? And you have a conversation about it. And then you introduce things they hadn't thought of, like you're going to wind up in the principal's office talking about where did you learn the word vagina, or whatever it is. So, but you have a conversation and you let your kids know you can talk to me about this at any time. I'm always available to listen. Kids also need to know that they have permission, because I remember friends of ours, really good friends of mine, told their daughter this: if something ever happens and you don't feel comfortable telling us, tell Diane, tell somebody else, but tell someone. You don't have to tell us, but tell someone, because we want you to tell. So, give your kids permission to tell, give your kids permission to own their own feelings and to be able to verbalize those in your house. You want to know about this before anybody else, believe me. And you want to know when their gut feels, like Sadia was saying, like all of you were saying, when your gut feels something isn't right, you want them to be able to talk to you about that and not shut them down when they come to you, because maybe at that point it's the grooming happening and you can stop the rest if you don't shut them down.
Yeah, and I think it's important also to add to that, Diane, that with my kids, when we have these conversations, and I'm like, and if you forget everything that I just said because you're ever in a situation where you're nervous or scared and you don't remember any of my words, right? That is okay. The minute that you think of it, the minute that you remember, like, oh, my mom said that no one should be touching me there, you can come to me and I don't care. So there's that piece of, and if something does happen and if you haven't told, then that's okay. There's never a time and a place where you can't come back and say, this happened a month ago, a week ago, a year ago, right? Like there's always space for kids to come back and for parents to communicate that it doesn't have to be the first time. That's ideal, but if it doesn't, it's okay. You're not going to get in trouble for not disclosing or saying something the first time.
And I think that's important to even say across the age continuum. You stopped at a year, but you can tell even if it happened 20 years ago, because I think with adult survivors, that's part of the worry and concern too, of people asking, well, why did you wait so long? And, and why didn't you say something then? And even when you have an adult child that is maybe sharing with a parent that there was abuse, the parent, even though they're talking to their adult child, they're going back and saying, well, what was it about me that you couldn't tell me that when it happened to you when it was 8? And for that adult child, it feels like, almost a shaming, and it could be that parent just trying to wrap themselves around, who was I then that you felt like you couldn't come to me, and so there's all kinds of reasons why people just do not feel, victims don't feel safe to tell, and letting it be known, I think culturally as well, because that happens in some of these big cases as well, where people are being attacked, that, okay, why are they saying it now? And so, Sadia, you said it beautifully, but I think that's along the age continuum, that it doesn't matter how old you are when you tell, show up for yourself when you can show up for yourself, and it's the perfect time.
Yeah, and it's not just going to go away. Like, I think, I want that message, for parents, for everyone to know, trauma just doesn't disappear in time. So even if you have a kid, teenager, adult that's very good at hiding their maladaptive coping way, there are ways that they have learned how to cope with it, by being a perfectionist or by being a people pleaser, things that kind of sometimes get rewarded. At some point in time, it's going to start showing up. So trauma has to be addressed head on at a certain point, even if it looks like they're doing okay, they're fine, their grades are still up, it's still their body is still experiencing the trauma.
And that's what I was going to talk about is, you know, we have so many parents that, you know, their kids were sexually abused when they were 5 or under, and they're like, they're not going to remember, that's not a big done now. And one, they can still have those physical body flashbacks or still have attachment issues based on that trauma, even if they don't have actual memories of it. And two, it is so common for people to be sexually abused by multiple perpetrators in instances over the course of their life. So I've had so many kids that have been sexually abused when they were 5, and then by a different person when they were 13, and by a different person in a college relationship. Like, there are so many different times. And so if that does not get addressed back then or along the way, they're opening the door for more abuse by perpetrators, because they can sense that this person has already been through something and they use that, you know. So not thinking that, oh, just because my kid's not going to remember, they don't need to get help, they don't need to talk about it, anything like that. It needs to continuously be addressed.
Oh, Heather, that was beautiful, because it's even worse when they can't remember. It's worse.
Yes.
Because you have different kinds of memory. You have declarative memory and you have implicit memory, and the part of the brain that you need in order to record and maintain long-term memory, explicit memory, where you have words. You can say, oh yeah, it was Tuesday, it was raining outside, I was wearing red shorts, that's not mature enough until you're about age 3. So things that happen before age 3, where you don't have a story to go with it, you do have implicit memory. So you have the body memories, the sensations that go with, and you just feel crazy. You feel like, I don't know why I'm like this, I just feel crazy, and it's worse. So for that reason, and because it organizes your brain around that experience. And so you just keep reacting to it over and over and over again in a way that protects you from it, even if, whether or not it's still going on. And everybody's looking at you like, what is wrong with you? It's not what's wrong with you, it's what happened to you. So yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up. That's really, really important. They are not going to forget, and it's worse.
Mm-hmm.
And oh, go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was going to move on to something different. Go ahead.
Oh, for professionals, I think what I would just want them to know is, when I say professionals, I'm saying any professional support, whether you work in the school, whether you're CPS, whether you're on the legal side of things, just understanding that when a victim discloses, to me, it kind of feels like it becomes an assembly line of care. And so how you respond to that victim becomes part of their trauma narrative, becomes part of, really what's going to dictate them moving along in their care and getting their healing. If it's going to, kind of make them do a fork and say, oh, this isn't safe because of this person, treated me in this manner or dismissed me or minimized me, then everybody else afterwards is going to do the same. So just being aware that how you respond to an individual when they come is really pivotal to them continuing on to the steps to getting all of the support and the help that they need. If you are in the school and the child comes to you and or you can kind of pick up that there's something going on, our job is not to investigate. That's for CPS. It's just to report. It's to report something. Let everybody do their job, but when you show up, just remember to do your job with care, because this is somebody that is walking through a process that is intimidating itself, and they're searching for the evidence almost of people not believing me. They're searching for the evidence that's connected to that fear and that doubt and all of that. And so we have a responsibility not to try to not, perpetuate that evidence that they're searching for, so they can just continue to go along their healing journey.
Mm-hmm. And I was going to start talking about professionals too. One thing that I think most people do not end up hearing, especially from counselors and therapists specifically, is that normalization of the abuse can feel good, that your body is responds to the abuse. And I think a lot of people gloss over that or don't bring it up, and people you know, people who are survivors don't want to talk about it because it's embarrassing or it feels like shameful or something like that. And so I think it's really important for counselors to bring up, hey, you know, it's totally normal if any part of it feel good. That means that your body is working, it's doing what it needs to do. It's just nerve endings and you're responding to it. There's nothing wrong with you for physically from any of the abuse. So I think something that, you know, I think a lot of people are shocked when I say it, and are, you know, that helps them move further along in their healing so oftentimes, because people have never mentioned that before, even if they've been to other counselors or therapists.
Creates so much shame for them. So definitely providing that just that education, right? That it's biological response. I think also one of the things with for professionals is, and it kind of goes along with what you're saying, Heather, is really honoring, I guess, the coping skills that they use to survive the situation, because sometimes I think that kind of creates a lot of shame as well, and you know, guilt for the survivors, because sometimes they would go along with the abuse, not because it felt good maybe, but because that's what they had to do to survive the situation right in that moment. So it's okay, if it meant me allowing this to happen, that I could go and hang out with my friends, you know, which is super important for an adolescent at that, you know, so I think just really just allowing them to recognize, like, you had, or if you were a child, you had to do what you needed to do to survive the situation, right? Like if you had no one protecting you in the moment, you had to fend for yourself in whatever way was best. And getting them to understand that and forgive themselves, I think, is really important.
And you know what else along with that is, not only I did what I had to do so that I could survive, but I did what I had to do so that my brother didn't grow up without a dad. Yeah. I took one for the team so that my sister could have a dad, because I don't, and I know what that's like, so that they would leave my sister and brother alone. So, because very often part of that grooming is, if you don't let me do this, then I'm going to have to do it to your siblings. So, okay, I'll take it, so that you leave them alone so they can maintain their innocence. So you can't shame people for that. The other thing I wanted to say about professionals is that you don't get married to your model. Get to know your client. Meet your client where they are. They go as fast as they can go. And if they can't go fast, you don't either. You can push them a little bit when you think they're ready. But if you marry a model and we're on step 12 and you have to do step 12 right now, well, your client may not be ready for step 12. So you need lots of models and lots of tools, and you use what they can do now. And when they can do more, they will. But the other thing to remember is that it's the relationship that heals, because before your model will work, they have to trust you. They have to trust you. They're not going to trust you if you don't hear them where they are, connect with them the way they show up, however they show up. I do a lot of normalizing. Well, it's no wonder you feel like that. Given what you just told me, it'd be weird if you didn't feel the way you feel or function the way you function. So of course this is where you are. People need to have permission to feel like they don't have to change. You're okay with them the way they are. Then they have permission to choose, because again, if they abused it, they didn't choose that either. So the choice to choose to change or not change, or whatever direction you want to change, needs to belong to them. We're the guides. We're the people that hold the space so they can do the work that they need to do at the pace that they can tolerate it. Because you can push somebody backwards if you push them too far. And then not every model will work with every client every time. There's no such thing as a one-size-fits-all model. Get to know your client, meet them where they are, find things you like about them, find their strengths, their vulnerabilities are going to show up, and go from there.
So I wanted to bring our talk to a close, but I wanted us to be able to you know, have hold space for the survivors and the victims as well. And I wanted to know if you all could share any inspiration, any advice, anything that you would think would be helpful in sitting in space with other survivors in their healing that may help somebody that is, you know, trying to get along their healing journey, trying to disclose and speak up, especially now in the time where, you know, we have to sit in the heaviness that kids and you know, individuals are trapped with their abusers, you know. And I read a statistic last night, or an article from RAIN, and they were saying that right now they are facing their highest calls from minors. So kids are understanding that, you know, systems are a little bit different when it comes to CPS. They're not in schools where maybe they will talk to their school counselor or their teachers about it. And so they're trying to find resources that they can utilize to be able to get help the best way they can now. So if there's anything that you could say, I think that would be a wonderful way to conclude our time together.
How many of you guys, I bet it's all of you, you tell people what you do for a living and they go, oh my God, I don't know how you do what you do. God bless you. And you're like, look, it's not as bad as it sounds, because it really isn't. I mean, Pam, you said it was the most fun you had at work, right? It's, you know, the thing is, what I want people to know is it gets better. None of us could do what we've done as long as we've done it if it didn't get better. You can get better with the right support and the right help. Not only can you get better, you will get better. All you have to do is put a little effort in. We'll help you there. You'll get better. You don't have to let this run the rest of your life. I've seen too many people get better to be able to you know, so I have complete confidence in that. I'm not going to look at you and say, well, maybe, or it could, or might. No, it can. All you need to do is find a therapist that you can trust, who's skilled in this area, and you two run together and you will get better.
I was going to say, it's something that happened to you and it's not who you are. Too many people tangle it up with the meaning and value they place on themselves and their own worth. And this is just one instance, even if it's a bunch of instances on your timeline of life, and it is something that happened to you. It was not your choice. It is not your fault. It is something that, if you can detangle that, you can see that you have so much value and so much to offer this world, and not to let that thing define you.
Absolutely. I mean, I feel the same, exactly how Heather worded it. Like, I gain a lot of my strength as a person from sitting across from people that at the moment where they meet me, they don't think they have any value in the world. And they are the most resilient, empathetic, compassionate people that I've ever met. And a lot of times I tell my client, the fact that you're still sitting in front of me after all of this stuff that you have carried all this time speaks to your resilience and your strength. And like, there's so much more that you're supposed to do in this world, right? So yes, it is something that happened to you. And when you can go on the journey of healing, because it doesn't happen overnight and it's not something that's ever like done. None of us are ever finished. But when you can get to a space, I wish for my clients to be able to see themselves just a little bit how I see them.
Yes.
You know, that's what I wish for all my clients. So.
Yeah, that was perfectly put, Sadia. And I'll piggyback off of you. But I think what I would tell a survivor is that the healing, right? Like the healing process, that healing journey, it is scary. It can be painful and feel overwhelming at times, but to remember that they've already survived the hardest part, which was the abuse itself, right? And that did not break them. You know, they're still sitting there, you know, across from you in the therapy space, and that same abuse that hurt them so much also help them create like those inner resources that they need, right? And that strength, that resilience that you see in every client, you know, definitely it's there, right? So they definitely can do the work, and that they will get better.
Gosh, you all put that so beautifully. No wonder I love working with you guys. I guess the only thing I would add is, and I know y'all thought this when talking about your clients, but some of the most amazing, strongest clients are the smallest ones, the youngest ones. I mean, they have a natural propensity to get better and be hopeful.
Mm-hmm.
And they do.
And I would just add that I often tell my clients, you are an agent of change, you know, in your families, because again, sexual abuse often is a generational thing that happens in family. And so a lot of times I'll have clients that they'll come, they'll through, and then they'll say, you know, my cousin had mentioned that this happened to them, and my, you know, and so then they realize, I'm not the only one in the family that this has happened to. I may not even be the only one in the family that this person in the family also abused. And so just remember that you are the agent of change, and you are showing up for yourself, but you're also creating an opportunity and a message to other people to say, you know what, I matter too. And that, and your voice is validating for another person, possibly in your family, that, you know, and this wasn't right either for me. And so then it just allows more people to have the conversation that needs to be had to change the dynamics in family, because sexual abuse also continues in secrecy. And that's what the perpetrator wants. They want the silence and the secrecy to keep it going. And so, you know, it's, you never know the chain of healing that happens when you show up and you are, you know, and you use your voice and start your healing. So.
Can I have one more thing? Because I think I can speak for all of us. It really is an honor and a privilege to work with victimized people, children and adults and youth. It's an honor and a privilege. And I always feel as though I get a gift when I work with them. I have so much respect for them. It really is incredible. So that's the other reason you can keep doing what you, no matter how much you try to give them, you get so much more back. They're amazing, amazing people.
They do all the work, right?
Yeah.
We with even, you know, we may have education or a skill set or something, but we just guide the process. They do the work, the witness, right? And it's beautiful. It's a beautiful process.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Well, I want to say it also is absolute honor and a privilege to work with you all. You know, I know at different points in times we were together, and, you know, the places and kind of our magic was just being a group and doing it together, and we're all in different spaces, but you guys still are an inspiration to me. I am awed at how y'all show up as healer in the community, and so I really, really do appreciate you all coming together and, you know, lending our voice as best we can and helping individuals as best we can, particularly in this time. So thank you so much, my dear friends and my dear colleagues. What I'll do is when, you know, I post this and I share this, if you all could give me your contact information or whatever, where individuals can reach out and can be a resource, you can be a resource, that would be absolutely wonderful. Any other resources that we can all think of that we work with our clients that we think would be good to also send out, if you could send that along, and I can add that to, you know, this video, then that'll be some, you know, people can be able to get the help that it is that they need and seek the resources that they need.
Thanks for doing this.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Stay healthy and well.